Move that the House take note of miscellaneous business. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, last week I had the privilege to represent the government in India supporting and encouraging some wonderful New Zealand companies and entrepreneurs, some of our excellent educational institutions that are getting out there and selling their stuff, their innovation and their Kiwi ingenuity to the world. It was the same in the US a few weeks ago, and it's the same when I have the opportunity to visit around the country, regions like Hawke's Bay, West Auckland, Palmerston North and so on. It's not easy for these companies, it's hard work. These people live out of suitcases, they get to know new markets, they deal with the heat and they deal with the cold, but it's also the thrill of the challenge and succeeding in this most 21st century of pursuits, Mr Speaker, becoming successful in the global world. It's also about creating things that people value and then working with them to get them to market, partnering up with people, obtaining capital and making deals. It's challenging. We've always talked about moving up the value chain, Mr Speaker, but we're doing it. And the euro and the US dollars are making it challenging, but our companies are succeeding, Mr Speaker. They're good at it. And organisations that the New Zealand taxpayer supports, like NZTE, Education New Zealand, MFAT, Tourism New Zealand, the research sector, are all assisting them in doing it. Mr Speaker, our exports are up due to a lot of hard work from some great Kiwi businesses, and jobs are growing. Our economy has grown in the last 12 months faster than most countries in the OECD. But meanwhile, back home, Mr Speaker, the Labour, Greens, New Zealand First opposition are in a very dark space economically indeed, Mr Speaker. They are seeking to reintroduce 70s-style Fortress New Zealand economics, Mr Speaker, last seen when Mr Peters arrived in Parliament, Mr Speaker. They want to somehow strong-arm down the New Zealand dollar to depreciate it, to decouple New Zealand from the global world, Mr Speaker. Leaving aside that it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked in Switzerland, and it hasn't worked in Japan, and leaving aside that if it did work, it would cause massive cost of living increases for all New Zealanders, and never mind that a depreciation of 20% of the New Zealand dollar is proposed by John Wally, Selwyn Pallett and other fellow travellers of the Labour Party, would put up the input costs of all New Zealand businesses, Mr Speaker. They want to go ahead and do it. They want to control the New Zealand dollar and somehow decouple us from the world, Mr Speaker. They also want to control and prevent foreign investment in New Zealand, Mr Speaker. We had the frankly preposterous suggestion from Mr Cunliffe last week that ministers should decide who owns Fisher and Paykel, not private shareholders, Mr Speaker. Well, if that actually was allowed to pass, Mr Speaker, she'd be a very sorry day for capital investment in this country indeed. And in fact, we had a taste of that during the last decade, Mr Speaker, when the share market went sideways for all that time because of the strange policies of the previous government, Mr Speaker. They also want to halt immigration, even if it might help the rebuild in Christchurch, Mr Speaker. Halt immigration, even if it helps the rebuild in Christchurch. So they're going to say to the people of Christchurch, well, it'd be really great for us to build these buildings, but we're not going to bring anybody in from overseas to help do this. And two of New Zealand's leading newspapers, Mr Speaker, have used the X word to describe that policy, Mr Speaker. They have said xenophobia is what we're talking about with that policy. So, meanwhile, their friends in the Greens are out there trying to stop every opportunity to grow with renewed vigour, Mr Speaker. They're opposed to oil exploration. They're opposed to new mines. They're opposed to dairy farming. They're opposed to convention centres. And together, imagine it, you'd have the hapless Labour Party putting up the shutters to stop New Zealand being involved in the world and hiding from the world and saying the world is out there but it's too scary. Meanwhile, back at home, the Greens stopping everything from happening, Mr Speaker, and Mr Peters sitting there trying to work out which way the weather vane will run on any particular day, Mr Speaker. We cannot, nor should we attempt, to turn the clock back to the 1970s.
Point of order, Brendan Horan.
Should he not be referring to the Right Honourable Winston Peters?
Order. Order. Now look, order. I asked members not to interrupt 5-minute speeches. The way the member was being referred to was not disrespectful. He referred to him as Mr. Peters. I think the member's technically absolutely correct, but I do not want 5-minute speeches being interrupted like that. The Honourable Stephen Joyce has 12 seconds remaining. Has 14 seconds remaining.
14 seconds to go, Mr. Speaker. We should not, now, can we attempt to turn back to the 70s? There is no Mother England to buy every mutton leg we can grow. We live in a modern world. There are fantastic opportunities for New Zealand. We need to help our country become more competitive and support the companies that are getting out there and taking their chances and getting ahead, Mr. Speaker.
The question is the motion be agreed to. Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.